Dear God, we thank you so much for all the many blessings that you pour out on us. And we thank you that you have guided and led us this far. The world is troubling, many things are happening, but we can have faith in you. We know that you are good. We know that you care about each of us. We know that you have a plan, and we know that you are working now. We can marvel at the works of nature, and we can also marvel at the scriptures and prophecy and see poetry and beauty there also. May that be a blessing to us today as we do some study on the book of Daniel. We dedicate this service to you and we offer you our love and worship. In Jesus' name, amen. Right, so this morning I wanted to present a bit of a review of some material I presented in South Africa last year, and I'm not sure if many of you have seen those presentations that I did there. So I will quickly recap on that before I wanted to take us into some other chapters today. I'm going to assume that people haven't seen those, but if you have, then that will maybe help a little. And we will just try to cover it in a light fashion, and then hopefully that will give me time to get into some new material today. So if this is repetitive for anyone, I guess I would apologize, but it's actually good to repeat things anyway so we can have that memory. When I was in South Africa, I presented some material about how I had placed 2 chapters of Daniel on a line, and those chapters were Daniel 2 and Daniel 5. So I lined them up together and tried to show where I placed various parts of that story on our reform line. So a lot of this work that I did was based on the repeating pattern. So we're all quite familiar with the repeating pattern. Does anybody, I've got people in the room here, people can also unmute and speak. When I say repeating pattern, what do you think that I'm talking about there? Anyone?
Boston, Concord, Exeter test.
Okay, great. So this is something that's not new. I think Elder Tess had identified this, and maybe some work had been done prior to that perhaps, but she kind of really made that a nice packaged thing for us to use, that she identified that every dispensation on our line has this repeating pattern, and you could kind of compare the different ones, those sort of increases of knowledge, waymarks, and the formalizations, and they had various characteristics that seemed to repeat. So what are some of the features of each of those? Maybe somebody online would like to unmute and just give a short description maybe of one or a few of those. What's something that you would identify at a Boston or a Concord or an Exeter?
At Boston, you go ahead.
Boston is like an unsealing of a message. Concord is an increase of knowledge. Exeter is formalization of the message. And then the test.
Yep. And then the test. And some people have seen test as a period of time between Exeter and the last waymark, and some people sort of mark it at the last waymark. And there's validity to both perspectives on that. So sometimes that last waymark, we might call it a shut door. So it's sort of a little bit more defined. And what we sometimes see there is, say, 2 groups, or the sort of that crunch moment where a decision the evidence of decisions is made known. So we've seen this repeating pattern plenty of times, so I think we're all pretty familiar with that. Now, Another kind of key sort of things to put in place before going into these chapters was to look at 3 waymarks in particular: 9/11, Sunday law, and close of probation. So why is 9/11 a special waymark? We often think of this one as quite special. One of the reasons is because, in inverted commas, it was invented by us. Ellen White didn't give us this waymark. This is something that we had to discover, and it was quite a central pillar of this movement's message. 9/11 is a harbinger of close of probation. We've learned that. And what else begins at the waymark of 9/11? Anyone?
Early rain.
Is it equality?
Judgment of living.
Judgment of the living. Yep, I heard early rain begins there. Yes.
Islam.
Yep, we had the third woe. We mark as beginning at 9/11, so that's fine. Thank you, everyone. It's quite an important waymark because it's the beginning of these things. It's the beginning of rain. We also mark the beginning of when the plant is growing there. That's where the seed is planted and it begins to grow. It's the beginning of the judgment of the living, yes. The sealing, so we have in our vows as well, the beginning of the sealing. So there's been some work done to try to uncover this this information out of 9/11 because Ellen White didn't give us this information. What arrives at 9/11 as well is this is where we mark the arrival of the second angel and the arrival of the third angel. And I'm pretty sure we have consensus in the movement that that's where we mark the arrival of those 2 angels. If the sealing begins at 9/11, we would probably also mark that the mark of the beast would begin there because they're counterparts of each other. So 9/11 is a really important waymark because that's where we mark the beginning of all of these things. They're all different representations of prophetic truths. So that's 9/11, and I just wanted to highlight the importance of that, especially when we start to place these chapters on the line, especially chapters of Daniel, which we say align with those angel messages. Sunday law, what happens at Sunday law? So often we refer to Sunday law as a turning point. Sometimes Sunday law is referred to as midnight or midway. Elder Tess had done a study on the midway studies where that is a turning point in various histories. You see that something key happens at that waymark and then things change direction, turn around, maybe start going backwards. So Sunday law is a pretty key important in that way. With the rain, we see it shifting from early rain to latter rain. So there's some sort of a change there. With the plant, in the first phase, we would see that the plant is growing. And then the second phase, we're looking more at the fruit of the plant that becomes visible and it grows with the rain that brings that growth in the fruit. At that waymark, that would be a Boston. Again, Sunday law waymark is a Boston. I hope that we can picture that in our mind. So what would that mean if Sunday law is a Boston?
Beginning of the message?
Yeah, thank you. So it would be the beginning of a message again. So we would have had one arrive at 9/11, and then at Sunday law we have another message arriving. And with the plant model, when we look at a phase now, it's the beginning of the phase of fruit. What has to happen in nature for fruit to grow? What do we need that we would mark that initial beginning of a fruit?
Let the rain to mature the fruits.
Correct. There's rain. What about inside the plant? So we've got a plant that has generally, if you're a gardener, even if it's a tree, you need something special to happen from your plant to being just a nice looking plant with nice flowers. Something has to happen so that those flowers will become a seed or a fruit, something you can use. A microphone. Microphone behind you.
Pollination?
Pollination. All right. So what's pollination like? To put it simply, when I look at pollination, it's a bit like when somebody gets pregnant. You have to have, basically it's like a sperm going into an egg, but it's a plant version of that. So we have something that is like a seed that is planted into the safe, what they would term as a female part of the flower. Sometimes plants can be self-pollinating, other times you'll need bees, but we're looking at wheat here and they pollinate within themselves. The wind blows and the pollen falls and it goes down, and it's fascinating how it works. So what I see there is a repeat of what we had at 9/11 at that waymark, where a seed is planted. Again, tiny on a micro scale, if you were to look into the flower, you will see a little seed being planted there, and that will develop and grow into fruit. The only point I'm trying to make is that that would line up with our understanding of Sunday-law being a Boston. That you see a new, say, message arrive, it's invisible, but it's there. It's so hard to see, but that will grow and you'll see the development of that. So we mark that at Sunday-law, that's a Boston, and it would be like a new message arrives. The
Excuse
judgment
me,
of the
correct, Katherine.
Pardon?
Sorry to interrupt you. Excuse me, Katherine. Sorry to interrupt you. I just was going to ask you, if it's a Boston and it's the beginning of that seed unfolding, then would it be an early rain and a latter rain happening at the same time there?
No. So we've had the early rain for the plant to grow, and that's happened already. And then this fruit that grows during the latter rain. So in nature, that waymark would align with a change from early rain to latter rain. So we're not doing something tricky with the rain there and making a fractal. Is that okay?
Okay. So even though it's a new message, it's still latter rain. Mhm.
It's the latter rain message.
Okay.
With that,
Yeah,
you think of it
yeah.
that way. It's the latter rain message. It
Yeah.
arrives, it's small, and it will develop. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, we have the judgment of the living. We know that that's already begun since 9/11, but here we mark a change from what we call record taking phase to the investigative phase of that. So there's a change there, and also some sort of a shift in the sealing, because sometimes we would mark sealing at Sunday-law as well. There's different ways of understanding what that is. I'm not sure how to define that shift, but there's that change at Sunday-law. We also mark the second angel is empowered at Sunday-law and the third angel is empowered. So that's where we see the empowerment of the message. So the message arrived at 9/11, it grew, and then it's empowered at Sunday-law. So that's applied from an understanding that we now sort of have this confirmation of what we found. Maybe it was a bit harder to see before. And the mark of the beast as well is already there, but something at Sunday-law would cause some sort of a shift in that as well with the sealing. Next main waymark, which would be the close of probation, is the end of these things. So we see that the rain now stops. That's where we mark the end of the rain. There's going to be harvest, so we're going to harvest when it's not raining, if that makes sense. So these structures just help us with the line, how to structure things on the line. We use that agricultural model to explain that. Close of probation, that would be where we mark the plant is being cut from the earth. So whatever the plant represents, that's that beginning of harvest there, it's cut away. That's the end of that investigation of the living, and we would move then into a different phase of judgment. The sealing ends there. The second angel's message ends there, and the third angel's message ends there. And that would be that climax as well for the mark of the beast. How we can understand the end of the second and third angel's message, that would be something that may be more nuanced, say, but structurally that's where we mark the end of those messages. There's a quote from Great Controversy that just helps us to see why we would place those end of those messages there. So this is from GC 613.2, and she wrote that when the third angel's message closes, mercy no longer pleads for the guilty inhabitants of the earth. The people of God have accomplished their work. They have received the latter rain. So basically at Daniel 12:1, the model is that the cases are set and decided. And so the angel's messages, they end there because the work has been done. It's done its job and it's complete there. It's fulfilled. Again, I think that there's perhaps some nuances to that, but structurally that would be where we place the end of those. So when we go to
Katherine,
look
can
at,
I just ask a question?
sure,
Where do you place the image of the beast?
we can discuss that at the end. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm laying out these waymarks and this structure is because what I'm trying to do here is to take a chapter of Daniel that we say as a movement, this chapter aligns with the second angel's message. So if we look at the line, we can see where that message is happening on the reform line, and then think, okay, maybe the chapter of Daniel would align with that part of the line, would begin and end there with that middle waymark. That's what I'm proposing to everyone. So yeah, second angel's message would go from 9/11 to close of probation, and third angel's message also is from 9/11 to close of probation. And all of that, I think, is not new material as where we would put those messages. So the mission then was to put Daniel 2 on a line. So how did I go about that, or how would I do that? So it's to recognize that Daniel 2 is about the second angel's message, to link that to the structure we already have for that I just talked about. So to begin the story of Daniel 2 at 9/11 and end the story at close of probation. And then another part of this would be to use any symbols and numbers in the story as hooks to place at waymarks, and to use that repeating pattern of Boston, Concord, Exeter, and Test as a tool to link parts of that story to the waymarks. So there we're looking at 9/11, but we're also going to look at 2019, 2021, those ones in between, and see if we can place parts of the story with that. Another feature was to identify the turning point in the story, maybe as a check as well. Did some key event happen in the story which splits the story into half, some sort of a logical half, a turning point, something sort of like a key event, and then that would be suitable probably to go at Sunday law. If that can be done, and with that turning point in the middle, then that story would be divided into 2 phases. So you would have like the overall story of the chapter, but then you would have like a part 1 and a part 2, and each of them would have its own increasing knowledge, formalization, and some sort of a climax, and then another one would do that. So you kind of end up with 2 mini stories that form the whole. That would be, so the progression would be like the whole thing from 9/11 to close of probation. Then it would be like repeat and enlarge, where we have phase 1. I can compare that with phase 2 and look for Boston, Concord, Exeter Test characteristics. And another tool up my sleeve, I guess, is chiasm. So when we have a turning point in a story, sometimes it can be a chiasm, because say I walked to the shop and back, I go to the shop would be the turning point, and then I go back the way I came. I'm going to go back through the steps that I went through to get to the shop, I go through them in reverse on the second half of my story and end up kind of like where I was at the beginning. Not exactly the same, but it might be a bit like a reflection, like a mirror. So I think we're familiar with chiasms. It's something that I just wanted to check when I went through this process to see if there was some evidence of that might help me just confirm the way I have placed parts of the story. So I've found that quite interesting to look at. The mission after that was to put Daniel 5. So Daniel 2 and Daniel 5 are partners. It's been taught in the past, so I won't repeat the reasons why, but Daniel 5 goes with Daniel 2. They're both telling a similar story about the fall of Babylon. So after Daniel 2, do the same thing with Daniel 5. And we get an extra advantage because then I can compare the bits of Daniel 5 with what I did with Daniel 2 and see if they line up. So you kind of get this extra level of like cross-checking. So that was interesting. And so I'll walk us through a little review of how this came about, how it all ends up. And then from that, the idea is to make application of all of this. So it's, first of all, it's really nice to be able to see what God has done in scripture and how, you know, these line up. I think that's really lovely. So praise God for that. I think that's really amazing. I get blown away by that. But what we really want to know is how we can take that information and apply that to our time. And that's not my forte. That doing application is not my strength. I haven't done that. I won't be doing that today either. I have hoped that somebody would pick it up and do it or help me to do it. But hopefully if this is all solid, it would be usable for that. And maybe even as others present light in through other models, it will kind of marry up and we can make sense of this as well. I do think that, so in this story, we would have Babylon, and then we have Medo-Persia. So we have these symbols. We have Daniel, we have other wise men. Who do they all represent? I think we all know that we're looking at a lot of these stories as institutions. We know that there's a certain, say, a international system, a US international-led system that has been for a long time, and there's a new one, a changed one. There's, you know, so we look at a lot of this in terms of politics and institutions. And so, yeah, getting those definitions right would be really fundamental to all of this. And so maybe some old understandings and old ways we have applied these may need to be, say, refined. So I'm not going to do that. But also when I go through these, perhaps don't rush into making application in your mind either. The important thing for me is to get the literal thing laid out correctly first. That's the first step. And then if that's all right, then the next step would be to make application of that. So yeah, I think I've made all those comments. So I'm going to share my screen now and we can walk through a little review of what I did. And if you wanted to sort of more of the justification behind it, the resources are online from when I did it before in more detail. I'll just put this screen up. All right, so let me zoom out so you can sort of see where we're going. So here we've got a line. I've just taken out the section that we're talking about. So it starts at 2001 and it ends at close of probation. We've got Sunday law in the middle, and then we've got those other waymarks in between. 2019 is that minor waymark on the line of the 144,000. So don't get confused with the line of the priests. 2019 is our increase of knowledge after 2001. 2021 is our formalization. It's also midnight cry. So on the line of Acts 27, for example, the midnight cry is marked there. Sunday law, yeah, but the rest I think we know. And also see Sunday loud cry and midnight cry are often similar. They have similar characteristics to each other. might even say they're the same thing, but one happens before Sunday law and the other one is after. So let's keep that in mind as well. So 2021 is the midnight cry. The story for these chapters, we've got Babylon will fall. I'll say to Medo Persia because that really comes more from chapter 5. But we're going to see a prediction that this is going to happen. There's going to be a change in the kingdoms. Now, let's see if I can uncover some of this. All right. So Daniel 2:1, a message arrives. Can you think in your mind why at the beginning of Daniel 2 a message arrives? What happens at the beginning of chapter 2? I don't want to spend too much time in this, so I'll probably I can just say it just so that we don't get too slow here. So chapter 2 is going to be Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. Yep. So he has certain ideas in it. He's wondering, he has questions in his mind, he's thinking certain things that sort of triggers him. He's going to have a dream during the night. So that's a message arriving. So hopefully we can see that would align with our expectation. After that, there's, I'm going to say, growing suspicion. So it's an increase of knowledge for him. He's starting to see something about what's his growing suspicion about. In this story, it's about the wise men. He's just not, he's suspicious of their abilities, basically. Let me zoom in a bit. So that's how we see that increasing of knowledge for him. That develops even further to a promise to punish. So he's threatening them with death, basically. And that's a formal kind of message. He tells them exactly what his plans are. And then this leads to a crisis, which I've put at Sunday law, which is this climax where we see who can interpret. So it's going to save the day. Daniel's going to get this ability to interpret the dream, and we can see others can't. So we see two groups there, and we can see two things there. We see a climax because we get this, especially as readers, we see this. Thank God, God sent the, answered the prayer, and they're going to have this ability to explain the dream. And what we also see there is a message arrive, again, in a way, because Daniel is now getting what? The interpretation. Yeah. So this message about the interpretation has arrived. Hopefully that makes sense. Yep. So like I'm say God has sent a message to Daniel. So the dream was the first one, and this is now the interpretation part. Then here in this part of Daniel 2, we see an increase of knowledge for Nebuchadnezzar, at least. There's a partial explanation of the dream. So you don't get the full interpretation straight away. What you get for this section is two things. What the dream was. So he has to tell, this is what you dreamed, this is what you saw. So you get the symbols. And you also get the reason why. So he will explain, you had this dream because you were thinking about your legacy or what will happen after. So that's why. So you get two. So the symbols and the reason why. So that's an increase of knowledge. Then you get the prophet. Just summarize it as Daniel prophesies. He's going to now interpret the dream and explain it. So you get that formal message from God. This is my message to you, and this is what's going to happen. It's a prediction. So that's why I lined that up there as a loud cry, a formalized message. And then at the end of the story, Daniel's rewarded, and I put Nebuchadnezzar falls. So he actually falls falls in worship, I guess, at Daniel's feet. But that's the phrasing that's used there, and I'm saying that that's a symbol of Babylon is fallen. The prophecy itself also tells us that Babylon is fallen; it will fall. So it's a prediction of that. But symbolically, here we also see that Nebuchadnezzar falls. He doesn't die, but it's a symbol. So that's that chapter. Next one is Daniel chapter 5. So what happens at the beginning of chapter 5? A message arrives. Actually, yeah, well, I'll say it this way, a messenger arrives. So let's go to chapter 5 in our minds now. We've got to change our thinking to put on a different story. We're talking about many, many tekel you fasten in the hand, writing on the wall. When that messenger arrives, are they visible or invisible?
Invisible except the hand.
At first, it's invisible. So the hand becomes visible, but not at first. So I think I had looked at, and maybe you have to go to Ellen White for this. I had used that as parallel resource. This unseen watcher is there, watching all the, the festivities, or what we're going to say about that feast that they're having. So this unseen watcher arrives. And then from there, we get this progressive, this increasing knowledge about this message. So what's also interesting is mene tekel upharsin is a symbol for what?
2520.
2520. And we see in 2001 an opening of the 2520 as well. That's where we would mark the beginning of that opening up of that message. So yeah, growing fear. So the hand is appearing, they're trembling, their consciences are bothering them. They don't understand this properly yet, but they know something's wrong and they're scared. So there's this increase of knowledge that there's this doom coming. They have this feeling. So that's what I've put there. So you can see if you're watching as well, paralleling it with the one above. Then we have a promise. So this midnight cry symbols, the king cried aloud here, and I've taken that as a symbol for midnight cry. There's a loud cry. And there's also this promise to reward. So in the other story, we had a promise to punish. And in this one, we've got a promise to reward. Basically, the king throws their weight around in both of these stories. So you've got that there. Next, what happens next? Well, we know who's going to be able to interpret this. So again, Daniel, we find out in the story, Daniel is able to interpret this dream and others can't. So that I've lined up with the other story as well. And this is the key moment where things change. We always see as soon as this happens, sort of the story transitions to a new sort of a part 2. Daniel's going to explain this partially. So what's this writing on the wall? He's going to explain why, same like the other one, why this is happening. So you, Belshazzar, you should have learned, this is why this message is coming to you. So you get why, and you also get an explanation of what it says. So he's giving you the symbols first, doesn't give you the interpretation yet. So during those verses, that's what we get, an increase of knowledge, but not a full formalized message. After that, we get the prophecy. So Daniel will explain what this means and what's going to happen, and it doesn't take long. What happens? Babylon falls, the nation. Belshazzar dies. That's a symbol of a fall because the king is a kingdom. He falls, he dies, and Daniel again is rewarded. So we see the two groups, there's a reward and a punishment or whatever like that. You see this 2 different outcomes for 2 groups. So that would align with what we expect at a shut door. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. And again, the other study I did, I went into the passages and I sort of went through it a little bit in more detail. But essentially now what I've done is broken up those stories into sections. And then if people wanted to make application, they can go to those verses and sort of go, okay, if we're talking about institutions or whatever we're looking at now, what does that mean? And some of this has already happened, it's in the past, but some of this is future. The next bit that I had mentioned is we can take this as like the 2 phases and compare them with each other. So I think I will just take us through this as well. So back here when I looked at this one, we're comparing chapter 2 with chapter 5. So I've gone, okay, messenger arrives, they match. Okay, now what we're doing is we're going to cut the first half of these and compare it with the second half to see this increasing knowledge. So the 2001, we see a message arrives or a messenger arrives. And then at Sunday law, we see an interpretation arrives. So we discussed that already. That's invisible to Nebuchadnezzar, that interpretation. And then these ones, we get that partial understanding, that growing suspicion or fear, or from Nebuchadnezzar's point of view, he's starting to get this partial understanding of the interpretation. We get a prediction there. There's this promise to punish or reward. So there's that prediction that the king is making. And then we get this prediction that God is making here through Daniel. So they line up. And then that climax, those two outcomes that we already mentioned. So they compare, I think they work well together as well. Then chiasm. So here's what we would do with the chiasm. We would make a mirror image. The second half is like the mirror of the first. So this is a bit, I guess, obscure, a different way to look at a story, or this story maybe, but I had to go. So let me see if I can, yeah, I'll do it this way. So I started with those two. So if I take the passages from the bits that I have put at 2021 and I compare them with what one's lined up with the increase of knowledge after Sunday law, when I analyze those two side by side, I could see that at that first phase of the story, at that point, the king is over Daniel. This is where the king's making threats. I'm going to punish you. I'm going to reward you. I'm going to do whatever. Once Daniel gets that interpretation, everything changes. It flips over. Who is now at the mercy of the other one? The king is now needing to sit at the feet of Daniel and listen and learn. So there's this sort of way of seeing Daniel is now over the king, and the king has to sit down and listen and be quiet because God is saying something. So the tables turn as soon as Daniel gets that interpretation. Going back, and this one was also interesting. So when you compare the passages side by side, I underlined it all in my other study, but the word hand, and power is coming up in that first one. And it's about the king's power and the king's hand. So if you look at those passages, you'll see out of, however it's phrased, it's about the king's hand. And then here, it will say things about God's hand and God's power. So you can see that there's this transition, this turning point in the story. The first half is about the king's power, and the second part is about who's really actually, who really has the power, and it's God. And then at the beginning, we see the king's self-exaltation. You remember that the king is, in both stories, really exalting themselves. And then at the end, we see Daniel is exalted at the end. So there's this lifting up, there's a reward for Daniel. So it's like a reflection. So hopefully we can see that. I just thought that was nice. And then numbers. So this is also very interesting, and I could spend so much time on all of this, and I did. Numbers show up in the story, and they're symbolic. So if we look at the beginning of the story, we get some numbers. It's the second year of Nebuchadnezzar. Maybe we could say it's not a meaningful because it's just the second year. I don't know, but I took the number 2 from that. And also chapter 5, it gives 1,000, and that's clearly a number there that's there for a reason. We have 2520, as we discussed. That comes at the beginning of the story. It's not visible yet. The unseen watcher is there, and we're going to see that 2520 develop, and it climaxes here at the end, because that's the fulfillment of that. Perez, your kingdom will be divided. That's where it comes to fulfillment. So hopefully we can see that the 2520 is a consistent message through Daniel 5. And then at the end, so we have 2 again. The kingdom is divided. It meant torn in half. And Medo-Persia is 2 kingdoms as well. So you get the number 2 at the end. And also we get the number 62. So why does it say that Darius was 62? Well, I had a look at that number, and I looked for the meaning of 62. Does anybody remember what 62, where we see that other than this story? 62. So if I said 62 weeks, would that, yeah. Yeah. So in that, yeah. All right. So in the prophecy, the 62 weeks, that's where when I did a search through, I found it there. And that is a nice little thing that ties in with this story as well. When does the 62 years begin? 62 weeks begin? It begins when Jerusalem is restored. That's where you mark the beginning of the 62. When does the 62 end? It ends, I'll just tell you because this is a review anyway and summary. It ends at the baptism of Jesus. What's interesting to me here is that at close of probation, we see the restoration of Jerusalem. That's where we would mark restoration, Daniel 12:1. And at the beginning, at 9/11, we mark baptism. So those two symbols of the 62, it's restoration to baptism. This one's the other way around. It's baptism to restoration. So it's just it ties in nicely here with the model. The meaning of number 2, actually, I think I put some things down here. Covenant, two becoming one, covenant. So we see covenant here at 9/11. We also see covenant at close of probation. Daniel 12:1 is Jesus, the king. So 2, I think is a nice way to lock in these stories as well to these waymarks. 2 is also division. So we've spoken about that, where there's people going 2 different ways. They split up, they break up. So we see this as well. We see 2 groups being divided at close of probation. So yeah, there's various ways to see 2 at 9/11. We've got Twin Towers. We've got the second angel's message. That's the number 2. There's different things we can do with 2. Now, what 1,000 means is also covenant. 1,000 is about God making covenant with, to the 1,000th generation, things like that. So 1,000 is also along these same themes. And the 1,000th generation is compared with the 4th. They're contrasted with each other, the 4th generation. So we can mark 4th there as well. And we know, where the final generation, the 4th is sort of, it's more about the judgment of the 4th. But there's these people that obey God and love God and keep God's commandments. So they're contrasted. Probationary time as well. We get that as well from 1,000. And like I said, baptism and Jerusalem restored. These are all numbers that tie in with our themes. So let me just stop that for a second. Just want to check something. Okay. I wanted to remember why I put probation there. It's connected with 1,000 years because that's another application of 1,000. 1,000 years is as one day. And whenever that's mentioned, it's talking about a flood, that the judgment comes. You think you've got all this time, but for God, the clock has been ticking and it will come. So I would, if anybody's taking notes and you wanted to look that up, that's 2 Peter 3:8. We have Psalm 90 verse 4. And again, I'll read it out a bit. For 1,000 years in thy sight for 1,000 years in thy sight are but as yesterday when it is past, and as a watch in the night, thou carriest them away as with a flood. So yeah, and then we have 2 Peter 3 verse 6, and follow that passage through to verse 12. You'll see 1,000 years there. It's linked to burning up of fire, of the day of the Lord, of judgment. This is all close of probation language. So that's why I've put that there. And I think that's the main reason I've got that there. So that's a summary of what I did in South Africa. And I'll check my time. I didn't set my timer. 1:31. We started at, what time did we start? 1:45. 1:45. So, okay. So we've got another half an hour. think. Okay. So that's okay. I've got plenty of material, but I can always continue, next time I present, wherever we get up to. So what we're going to do now is something similar to Daniel 3 now. Okay, so it's going to be a mission now is to put Daniel 3 on a line. So step 1, recognize that Daniel 3 is about the third angel's message. That's already something we already understand. But it just gives us now, we can link it to the reform line. So we would have 9/11 to close the probation again, doing the same process that I already did for 2 and 5. In fact, they line up, both of those angels' messages, they line up at the same points. Now, what I also want to acknowledge is that others, and Ellen White also, have lined up parts of these stories with different waymarks to what I'm going to do. There are elements there that are like a loud cry. So she would put it at a loud cry. So, and I think others in the movement have also made application of this story to different waymarks on our line. And I think that's probably legitimate and okay. I don't think that this necessarily fights against that. There are some examples where we already place symbols at different waymarks. For example, the cross is one. Sometimes we will say that's 2019. Sometimes it's been said that that's at Sunday law. Sometimes it's been placed at 2001, depending on the point the person is making and the way they're applying it. So a symbol sometimes sometimes you can't just say, oh, you can't do that because it has to go at this waymark. Sometimes there's different ways of applying things. Similar thing happens for 538, the year 538. I've seen that applied to Sunday law waymark, and I've also seen that applied to close of probation waymark. And I don't think we think either is the only way. 1945 is another one I thought of. We've applied that to different waymarks as well, depending on the story. So yeah, as I go through this, it may seem like everything needs to be shifted to dispensation later. So just bear with me as we go through it, and then this could be just a different way of looking at it, or maybe we do need to move everything along. But follow my logic at least, and then we can see. All right, I'll share. I don't think I'm sharing yet, so I'll go back to sharing. So you can see my diagram. Okay. So this is just like we talked about Boston, Concord, Exeter, and Shotdale. These are some of the things we've compiled together for what goes at these waymarks. There's not just one thing, there's multiple different things that could happen at a waymark. And sometimes we don't see every characteristic of all of these at every waymark. Sometimes we'll see some symbol of an angel, but we're not seeing something else, or I'll pick a different one. Maybe there's a death decree here, but maybe not. Maybe it's something about an increase of knowledge. So it can depend on the story, what we're actually seeing here, but these are good little clues. And this is like a compilation of Miller's story, of Samuel Snow, things we've taken from the Great Controversy. So this is like patterns that we've sort of pulled from various sources, and sometimes the context might make a difference to which things we'll be seeing or not seeing. But essentially, we have already covered Boston, a new message arrives. Angel, sometimes we see an angel arrive or something like that at a Boston in a story. Concord, there's usually some sort of increase of knowledge. We have said that the message is not visible at Boston, but it becomes visible at Concord. And two groups have formed, but they're not always necessarily really clearly defined, or maybe they're there, but we're not really, it's developing still. So sometimes you see there's two groups forming here. We know at Concord, for example, that death decree, the people are in Concord with their own group, but there's two different groups and each of them are in Concord with themselves. So you sort of see that happening. Sometimes we've said that this is a simple, easy message, and remember Elder Tess taught that, and then it becomes hard at Exeter. Sometimes we see death decree symbols at this waymark, even though it's not at the death decree waymark, like where it would be in the Great Controversy. But we can see it sometimes, like say for 2020, we've seen it, which has been an application of that symbol. Exeter, formalization, sometimes we see something very formal, like a document, a decree, a policy statement, something like that. It can be a complex or a hard message. We see the two groups more clearly defined. They take their stance. Sometimes we see time setting here, like the soundings, things like that, where we see time setting, the soundings in Acts 27. Policy laid out, agitation of a Sunday law, or agitation of something, change of something that requires a change in behavior. Midnight cry and loud cry symbols, so something about a cry. If that's in the story, sometimes that helps us to put that at the Exeter waymark. And then at shut door, you might see two groups that have now split. They developed, but now they're like completely split, different outcomes. We've said that that's, you know, a shut door symbol. So in a story, sometimes there's a shut door. You get your results, the litmus test. There's been all different ways to look at this waymark as well, this pattern. But these are the kind of things, as I was going through the story, that's what I'm looking for. That's basically the principles that I bring to the story and go, okay, what am I seeing here? Am I seeing signs of this or that? So I just wanted to run through that as a little review, because we'll look at the story in a bit more detail than we did with the other one. Right, so Daniel 3. What's the story of Daniel 3? Let's change our story hat again now. We've gone through Daniel 2, we've gone through Daniel 5. Daniel 3 is the image of the beast on the plain. So what we have said in the past, that the theme of these ones is about an unrighteous decree. Both Daniel 3 and Daniel 6 have an unrighteous decree, and that's how it's been connected to the third angel's message before. So here we've got some sort of an arrival, what happens at the beginning of Daniel 3. So we've got to go to this image. What is the seed of this thing? Anyone can unmute. I'm happy for some participation, or anyone in the group here. Think about the beginning of Daniel 3. What's the seed of this thing?
Is it Daniel 2?
We're in Daniel 3.
I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by the seed.
Oh.
I was just thinking maybe Daniel 2 because it's
yes.
sort of, that's where it stemmed.
No, I get your point. Yes, Daniel, I thought you meant which chapter are we looking at. Daniel 2 is about this picture of this image, this prophecy about Babylon, and it's the statue. So yes, I'm following your point. That is like the seed, yes? So a bit more as well. So you kind of have to look at Ellen White's writings to see this. Daniel 3 verse 1 will jump into the story a bit sort of further down the track, but something's happening in the minds of these people before we get into the actual image being made. What's the backstory? Like what's happening just before they make this thing?
All these counselors coming in, the princes, governors.
Yep, and what did they do, Josephine? Was that you, Taylor? I couldn't hear, it was blurry. Well, whoever spoke the second after Josephine, I couldn't hear it. Could you try again? All right, we'll go back to Josephine then. What were you talking about the councillors? Can you elaborate on that a bit?
The councillors, the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, they're all very jealous, and they're coming together to give the idea to the king to build this image and to make people worship. It's kind of a worship the image, because they know that Daniel does not worship images. Daniel worships the God of heaven.
So not exactly. I don't think it happened exactly like that. I'll go to someone else. Does anybody else have more information on
What about
this?
Nebuchadnezzar
Yeah.
is showing himself superior to the rest of the people of renown, if you like, people of importance, governors and rulers and kings. So he's showing him, look how good I am, look what I've got. And he's actually making or showing them that they are subservient to him.
I think that's not exactly the main point of why he did this.
I think, can I say?
Yeah.
I think Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar is rebellious against God because,
Okay.
chapter 2, Daniel is explaining that, there's another power will come and overtake you. And he didn't like the idea that his empire will come to an end. So he rebels against God and built this image of gold all the way from the top to the bottom.
Thank you, Molly. So if I was going to say an idea arrives at Boston, what's the idea? The idea is what Molly said. Right. Well, God said Babylon's
God
going
is
to
a God
end.
of gods.
But my idea, I've got an idea. The light bulb comes on. I've got an idea. I'm going to do it different. Now, what's interesting about the story when you read Ellen White is that the princess had recommended to the king, hey, we've got this great idea. Why don't you make this really big statue in the plain? And everyone can look at it and glorify you, whatever. But they're not the ones who came up with the bit about let's make it gold from top to bottom. They just said, let's just make the statue. And Nebuchadnezzar goes, good idea, but I have an even better one. We're going to make it gold. So it's the king's idea to actually twist this story, twist what God said and change it. So that's what I'm marking as beginning at. This is almost like, it's not in the verse 1 of Daniel 3, but it happened. This is where it's arrived, but we don't see it yet. This is that invisible idea that's going to develop and grow.
That's sort of what Marie said, but Nebuchadnezzar's gone, no, don't like that God. I'm going to last forever, or this kingdom's going to last forever. So hence why it's all gold, which is what I think that's sort of what Marie was alluding to.
That's right. That's why when I understood what she meant, I'm like, yeah, that's on the right track. The Daniel 2 thing, it's not exactly this. This one is the beginning of something new because this is going to be the twisted version of it.
Yeah.
But he's taken that from Daniel 2 and he's twisted. So this is where that sort of twisted version comes. This idea, it arrives as an idea. So yeah, the king gets an idea to make an image entirely of gold, and this is going to develop now in the story through to the climax. So that's what I've placed, and I've got that reference there, PK 504, if people wanted to look that up at all. But I've described it. I've also got some things here where I've just highlighted the wise men had proposed an image similar to the one seen in the dream. And then, pleased with the flattering suggestion, he determined to carry it out and to go even further. So that's where we see this idea arrive. So yeah, bit of a prequel to what I'm placing here. Daniel 3 verse 1 is actually, I'm placing it, the increase of knowledge 2019. And this is where the image becomes visible on the plane. So it lines up with our idea of a message becoming visible. So it wasn't visible, now it's visible. It's going to develop, because I'm stretching this story out into little bits. It's sort of a bit more stretched out than maybe we're used to. So Daniel 3 verse 1, it's visible. The verses will say, it's made an image of gold. It gives us a description of the measurements, which we can look at later with the numbers. And then we see this gathering of groups of people to the plane. So we're already seeing two groups that are going to exist on the plane. They're gathered, but it's subtle at the moment still. But we will have ones that will bow and we will have ones that won't. And they're all there. So this is a concept that we'll mark there. So hopefully that makes sense. I'll put it there. Next one. All right, before I open it up. So what are the characteristics of an exeter? Well, we've talked about that. That is formalization, a decree, something like that. signs of a loud cry, cries of, things like that. And so what happens next? So if you look at Daniel 3 verse 4, somebody might see that ahead of time, or I can open it up. What are we seeing happen in Daniel 3 verse 4? A loud cry. Yeah. So often people have put this, and I think Ellen White also puts this at the loud cry waymark. My justification for putting it here is because midnight cry is also similar to loud cry. And we've still got this climax like this, what I'm going to put at Sunday Law is still coming up. So the herald cries aloud and gives instructions. So that's using those symbology of loud cry, midnight cry. There's a time prediction in a way, because it says at what time you hear the music, you're going to do this. So it's saying it's basically predicting a time. It's not giving you the measurement of it, but it's saying basically you have limited time. This is going to happen. So there's a prediction. And when this thing happens, you will know the time is up. So there is this symbolic thing about time here. So that's where I've placed that at 2021. So however somebody wants to make application of this, if they agree with the way I'm placing it, they could look at that and see how that would make sense in 2021. Right, so this one, Sunday Law. What happens next? Characteristics of a shut door. Daniel 3:7. We see this bowing or not bowing happening here. So this climactic moment. The time is fulfilled that we were told that there's going to be music. It's fulfilled there. There's a shut door. Two groups are split. It's the end of that test. So there's some of those phrases there. At what time? When they heard the sound, they fell down and worshipped the golden image. Okay, so that's like how we're going to look at a Sunday Law as a climax of something. Or we can also look at Sunday Law as the beginning of something. So what begins here? What begins here? Something begins. Let's see. Right, there's a new message. It's not visible. The king knows there's something special about the Hebrews. This new idea will develop into the final outcome. As the three Hebrews stood before the king, he was convinced that they possessed something the other wise men of his kingdom did not have. They had been faithful in the performance of every duty. So this thought arrives. This is a king's thought again. He's looking at them going, there's something different about you, bunch of you. I don't understand it, but there's something different about you. And that will develop because it's going to grow throughout the story. Who's this God that's going to deliver you out of my hands? That's the question. What is special about these worthies? So I see that as the beginning of a new phase of this story. Now it's no longer about who's going to bow. We already know that. That's been answered. Now we have a new question is, what is it about these particular people that follow Yahweh? Concord. So we've got to think of that repeating symbol that we have, those things that I read out. Think about 2020. I mentioned it already. So what happens next in this story? So you can go to chapter 3, verse 20. What happens next? These special people that the king's like, something about you. So what happens to them? Yeah, they get thrown. They get thrown into the fiery furnace. Are they guilty or innocent people? Yeah, morally, yeah, I guess you're right. If we're looking at it from, say, our traditional view, they're not guilty. They're innocent people. They get thrown into the fire, but they don't get killed.
According to God's law, they're innocent. According to
Yes.
law, they're guilty.
That's right. Yeah. So if somebody's making application, that would probably be a good consideration to have when we're looking at it differently now. So you can see how this could all be, it sounds like this should all go at the death decree. These are innocent people getting thrown in a fire. They're not going to get hurt. just like Ellen White would have said in the Great Controversy. But I've put this here at this one as a death decree in inverted commas as a symbol. So the righteous ones are thrown into the fire, no hurt on them. Interesting quote from Signs of the Times. So I'll read that out. Signs of the Times, May 6, 1897, paragraph 8. It's really interesting. So the king can see this. He gets really angry. And then as he's ordering this furnace to be heated 7 times hotter, and he's commanding his mightiest men to do this, he felt that it required more than ordinary power to deal with these noble men. His mind was strongly impressed that something unusual would interpose in their behalf, and his strongest men were ordered to deal with them. You see that he had this idea that there's something about these ones. He still has this idea. He's like, there's something supernatural going on here. I'm not going to leave it to chance. I'm going to get my strongest and the hottest. So no God can save these ones, basically. It's a fight between him and God. So you can see that there. He commands the mightiest men, etc., etc. They go into the furnace and it's not going to hurt them. So just hopefully you're following my logic. I know it's getting close to the end of my time. So I think I will have time to finish this line and then discussion and things like that and further analysis we can do later. But let me finish this off so that you're not left hanging. The loud cry. So what is the loud cry and what is the loud cry saying? And we look at the Great Controversy. What is the loud cry? Maybe someone online. What's the loud cry message say?
Come out of him, my people.
Come out of what?
Babylon.
Babylon. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So what has that got to do with this? So what happens next in the story if we look at verse 26?
Come forth out of the midst of the fire.
Okay, yeah, hopefully you could hear that. Come forth out of the midst of the fire, John said. There's a calling out. Can you see that? A calling to come out of this hot fire, right? What do we know about this fire? It's 7 times hotter. So I'm saying that this is a symbol of Babylon, the hot fire. So we'll get back to that. I'll look at that in more detail. But there's this cry to come out. So you can mark a cry there. Coming out of Babylon, I'll get into that. And also the message goes to the world. So this is interesting. This is from Prophets and Kings. No, that's not that one. We know that that's about the crying out. Prophets and Kings 5:11 verse 1. The tidings of their wonderful deliverance was carried to many countries by the representatives of the different nations that had been invited by Nebuchadnezzar to the dedication. Through the faithfulness of his children, God was glorified in all the earth. So we see this sort of message to the world here, and a calling out of Babylon. So this symbol of 7 times hotter. So the fiery furnace was heated 7 times hotter. That's where we get that symbol from. 2520 is a symbol of captivity, 7 times. We often associate the Babylonian captivity with that. We also know if you look at the 7 times as intensity, which is the way we would, I guess, literally read the passages that talk about 7 times, Leviticus 26, it's the 70 years. So 7 times is associated with Babylon. Again, that ties back to those 70 years of the missed Sabbath years. And so that's why it's 70. And I took the verse from Leviticus 26 there where it says 7 times for your sins. So I'm saying this symbolically, I can, I guess, use my artistic license to say is 7 times hotter in fire is Babylon. Fire also can represent Babylon. So I've got a bunch of verses there where Babylon is either destroyed by fire. We see that in Revelation. We see that in the Old Testament as well. And also Babylon burns with fire. So you've got verses there about It uses fire. It also dies by fire. So as a symbol, we can associate fire with Babylon. In the next chapter, when we do it, you'll see lion's den and a calling out of the lion's den, just as a preview of that. There's a calling out of the lion's den, and we know lions can represent Babylon. Okay, so they line up nicely, at least in my mind. Then close of probation. What other label do we sometimes use for this waymark? Sometimes we call it something else.
Shut door.
Shut door.
Worldwide
Anything else?
Sunday law.
Worldwide Sunday law. That's what I was looking for. Worldwide Sunday law. Never heard of that? No, that's something we don't hear as often today, but it has been talked about many times. For example, Elder Jeff would talk about, first in the United States, then to the world, things like that. That's where that comes from. And that was addressed during the Sunday law sort of messages as well, that initiative where it was pointed out that this Sunday law is actually also a period. It's not just a waymark. So this progression of Sunday law to worldwide Sunday law. What happens in Daniel 3, verse 29?
Global decree.
Global decree? Yeah. All right. So a decree to all peoples and nations to worship God. It's a worldwide decree. And we also see there's a promotion of the righteous. Again, a bit like we saw in the other stories, this lifting up. They get promoted. In a close of probation, we would expect that as well. I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made a dunghill. Ellen White says it was good that the king made a confession to seek this God, but it was not right to force the subjects, and it was exceeding his right as a temporal sovereign. He had no more right, either civil or moral, to threaten men with death for not worshipping God. This is not a good thing to do. So God never compels the obedience of people. God leaves everyone free to choose who they will serve. So that is why I have placed that ending of the story at that waymark, and that it ends up fitting into that time period that we had for the third angel's message, beginning and ending at those points. It has that middle bit which turns the story. So that's the way I've applied it for now. And then next time I talk, we can review this. We can look at Daniel 6 and do similar and see what we can, if we're happy with all of that, and especially as well with the numbers, they also really help. And if we're confident with all of that, then I think we can safely say that we could use this for application, but also allowing for flexibility for others to apply it in different ways where they think it would make sense to do that. I think that's fine. So what I'll do is I'll close in prayer, and then, I think I'll just zoom out. So that's where we can see where we've been. Maybe I'll do a quick summary. So we just did a review of the principles behind the whole reason I've used these structures, the rules that I've used, basically. Then we've done a little review of what I did in South Africa with chapters 2 and 5. Hopefully you can see that a little bit more clearly in a summary as well. Then we've started on Daniel 3. I think, that's basically where we got to. Next time we can look at, the next chapter. So let's bow in prayer. Loving God, we want to give you all glory and praise. We thank you for prophetic writings, our resources, and also our teachers who are helping to explain what these things mean. We pray a blessing on all the Sunday law speakers. We pray a blessing upon the camp, the small camp, or the meeting, the weekend meeting in France as well that's happening now. We thank you for this body of people that can work together, wrestle with ideas, and hopefully the truths float to the top, and we can be benefited and benefit others with these truths as well. Help us to understand your kingdom more clearly, how it would operate, what you require of us and what our doctrines and beliefs and policies should be. So we seek that guidance from you, and we know you are going to continue to lead us. So we just want to thank you so much and give you all glory and praise in Jesus' name. Amen.